Hi everyone, welcome back to Fraz's Capital Podcast. Today I'm joined again by Eliana. How you doing, Eliana?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. It's been an interesting week or so. We had Nvidia reporting at the end of last week, and they kind of had some pretty astounding numbers. Remember, the stock sold off after the Trump administration extended the ban of their H, which were chips designed specifically for the Chinese market. They were restricted from selling to like one of their key customers. So people were expecting a potentially a weak quarter, but it was pretty strong. It was up 12% quarter on quarter, 69% year on year. Earnings came in a bit light, but there is just no sign of slowing demand. The idea, everyone was forecasting that eventually the big tech companies, the hyperscalers, would slow down their purchases. So even if CapEx was maintained at the current level, growth would stop. And it wouldn't take long for like negative growth of CapEx of hyperscalers to translate into into a significantly lower growth rate for Nvidia and potentially multiple re-rating.
Yes, I saw that the data center revenue was 39.1 billion. And there's an interest. Why do you think that is?
Ultimately, it's still a data center business. That's their core products that they're selling for large language model training and inference. I guess the other sectors have been kind of weak. People are expecting autos to be stronger by now, potentially industrial as well. That hasn't really happened. In fact, most of the spending and the growth and probably the share market gains as well have been AI related in the last couple of years. That's what's driven the usage. That's what's kind of been behind a big chunk of the NASDAQ 100's rally, obviously led by Nvidia, companies that were on the right side of that. I guess when it comes to the index level, the interesting thing about this is that the disruption or the big new thing really favored incumbents. So it really favors like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, everybody with a computing platform because it's just dramatically increased the demand for compute. And it's not something anybody can do. So this is very different to like the Web 2.0, where you had companies, whether it was Spotify, Uber, these companies did require a lot of investment, but it's a different scale, right? They're ultimately building web apps with databases. You can really spin up a prototype very cheaply. I mean, it's extremely cheap today. It was relatively cheaper. There's been a lot of innovation at the product layer, so people using the models to kind of create an accountant, a bookkeeper, an NDIS plan manager. There's lots of people building on top of the large language models, but that's kind of where the big tech companies are most comfortable. Like they want to provide that compute layer, charge for the storage. Obviously, there's companies that benefit from all the network traffic. That's really where they're most comfortable being and having all those, letting everybody else compete at the product layer. So the fact that a number of products have been really successful, it's been a moment of like immense technological progress, but it's been the kind of progress that actually benefits the incumbents, and that's been good for the Nasdaq, good for the equity indices actually, good for equity markets.
There was a really interesting slide chart from Mary Meeker.
Yeah, I mean, she's been one of the long-standing tech analysts, and I think if you go through that slide, you come away very bullish. I'm pretty excited about the current state of affairs. LLMs are growing faster than the internet. There's some really good charts in there. One of them that was really pertinent was that big tech capex increased by 63% year on year. So there were people that were worrying it might stall. It's nowhere near stalling yet. And it's interesting that 63% number is very close to the 69% that Nvidia grew at. So it just shows roughly in line that that growth in capex is going to that one major company. But there were so many other charts worth mentioning. One of them was actually not direct, kind of AI related. The way that autonomous driving has taken off in San Francisco. I mean, have you ever seen one of those cars?
No, I haven't.
They must have come after after you left the United States. So they've taken 27% market share of San Francisco's driving, with ride sharing maybe at 34% down to 19. So they knocked Uber's market share down from 34 to 19 in like barely like a year and a half, while taking more than a quarter of the market and growing super fast. That gives you a pretty clear winner and loser, I think. I think Uber's going to be challenged. I mean, there was probably an idea that like Uber would be the network. So you plug autonomous vehicles will be plugged into Uber's network. Uber had the two-sided marketplace, and you'd use their customers, but that hasn't happened here. This is Google's Waymo. They've got their own app, and I imagine that's what it'll be like going forward. There's first mover advantage there. The only difference would be like, let's say there are four or five different competitive autonomous vehicles, and they opened up their platform to Uber. and put their cars on Uber, maybe then you'd have a more liquid market so consumers would end up using it. But at the moment, the only people in the game seem to be Waymo. Though, of course, you'd have to assume that Tesla comes in soon. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the debate around Lidar. So there was a huge debate in the tech industry over whether vision was enough, whether just normal light was enough to have autonomous driving. And the two sides of the debate were basically everybody saying, no, you need LiDAR as well. So LiDAR gives you distance and can kind of give you speed. You get all this extra data that you kind of have to infer from visual pixels. On the other side, you had Elon Musk and his team, which said, no, visual is enough. We can drive with our eyes. So it's just a compute problem. Enough sensors, enough compute. The data's there in the visible spectrum. The advantage of that also is obviously you don't have to pay for LiDAR, but really LiDAR is not a huge chunk of the cost. So I think it's likely that they end up, and then they actually do use LiDAR in training their models, in their training vehicles. You could probably just use vision and end up with a much better driver than a human, which may be true, but surely there are situations where having that distance and speed data is helpful. In low vision environments, if it's snowing, if it's raining. There was one of the accidents that a Tesla car had. It kind of drove into a white truck, so it just couldn't see the white truck. On LiDAR, that would be extremely obvious. There was another crash where it went straight into one of those dividers, like a freeway split, and just went bang straight into the middle. It was probably quite hard to see, so maybe the visual model couldn't get a proper read on it. But with LiDAR, I would have been able to. There was a huge number of companies that were set up to sell LiDAR. And basically, they're set up they probably peaked in 21, had contracts, we'll get the contracts next year, the year after, and then ultimately the big auto manufacturers just put them off indefinitely. And there's basically no major LiDAR, very little major LiDAR sold. So none of those companies have achieved significant revenues, and it's 2025. So if you look at their forecasts, they're all assuming that they'll be making serious bank by now, and it just didn't happen. It's kind of interesting to see that play out. A car with LiDAR was the first to be operational. It's taken 27% of the market.
I was just going to say, as autonomous driving becomes more popular, don't you think that more people will be willing to take an extra safety measure?
Maybe if there's a Tesla app and then Waymos have a better reputation for safety. I imagine also if there was a Tesla app now, there'd be some people that just don't like Elon Musk and probably wouldn't use it. The problem with being so political is, like, by definition, half the country disagrees with you, and the issue is just the way the politics split. Generally, it's 50-50. So it's not very good business to be very political. How much extra would you pay? What's the cost of LiDAR? Like, these are expensive cars once they're souped up with all the equipment, and you're probably talking about a few percent extra to have a sensor that can measure the distance and speed of every object around it. I'd definitely pay an extra few percent. I'm not sure if it'll be a consumer choice, but if Waymo comes out with data that their car is safer, that will definitely drive consumer choice, and that'd be very hard to fix. If one company gets a reputation for being more safe, that's the kind of thing that does drive consumer demand. We see it all the time. Look at the emphasis on safety in all car advertising. It's like it's a key component, it's a key part of the sales pitch of new cars. It's like they design cars for safety. It's one of the reasons, like, the form is the way it is. People worry about dying in a car crash. It looms large in everybody's mind. It's not completely rational either.
On the topic of Elon Musk, SpaceX had another Starship test flight that was successful this time. It's the furthest they've ever gone.
Yeah, and he said there's a launch window to Mars in 2026 that he's going to try and hit. All of a sudden, that doesn't seem so far away, does it?
Feels extremely close to be going all the way to Mars, because I'm pretty sure they've only broken the barrier and all in one piece come back down to Earth.
Yeah, the good thing is it won't be manned. But what he did allude to is that he's building these humanoid robots. Like, if you can just ship these humanoid robots, let's say there's a handful of astronauts on Mars, but you've shipped like 100 humanoids that can basically do what people can do. Like, think of all those science fiction films where, like, you're on Mars and, like, you lose contact with Earth, like Matt Damon. It's like a common trope in science fiction of somebody stranded. In this case, you didn't have to go outside. You can just send the humanoid robot out there.
Didn't they have applications a couple of years ago of people who wanted to go to Mars, non-return trips?
I think they did, yeah. It's going to be great content. Like, whoever does it is going to be super famous. They'll get their more than their 15 minutes. I don't know, it's pretty interesting. Would you go to Mars?
No, I like it here. But I think the point about humanoid robots would be so interesting in so many aspects, not just for exploring that, but think about dangerous jobs like working on oil rigs.
Going into reactor core,
Mhm.
lifting things. Like, we're pretty dexterous. Add in a bit of strength from a mechanical frame. And as they say, the world's designed for people, right? So they can immediately slip in. And that's where I think it's interesting. I've been like thinking about this for a while. I'm trying to figure it out. It's like if you have, let's say you have an extra person, right? Like an extra baby is born, that kind of adds to global GDP. They're going to live their life, they're going to consume, they're going to like spend, they'll pay some taxes, probably pay net taxes. What happens if you just like spawning these humanoid robots? They obviously have their own economy as well, right? They need to be supplied, they need energy resources, they consume, they can earn, they can do productive work. Does that then decouple global GDP from the size of the world, the global population? Like, that'd be really interesting if it is. If it is, then basically everything is a buy right now. Then there's going to be like significant growth ahead. There's 800 million people using ChatGPT now, 20 million subscribers, and that's enough to get 8 billion of revenue, which has come from nothing. Like, these businesses are big. Like, that's a lot of people using it. Google said there was like a billion plus people interacting with their AI, which I think is quite cheeky because I think they're just talking about those little AI summaries. But if you've clicked on it once in a month, you've then interacted with it that month. And then they can then get that data. Because remember what they did is they had this insight that instead of ranking, that you could rank websites based on how many other websites link to it. It's a really basic conceptual algorithm. Obviously, execution is difficult. But then as people start using it, you can optimize it. It's just a simple loop, like just improving and iterating the product based on what people like. Same in Instagram, Facebook, or Amazon. If you go to Amazon and you're signed in, your front page will be completely different to my front page. It'll take advantage of all the data from all our purchases, but also what everybody generally does. They know what people are interacting. They know if the AI is helpful, if in the first few sentences when you glance at it, that's something you want to click more on. If you click more and spend time on it, then they know that it's good and they can optimize. There's kind of like an attention economy. Say 7 billion people on the earth, and there's however many minutes and hours in the day, seconds in the day, and you're awake for maybe 18 of those, 17 to 18, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. There's only so much attention that we all have. We can't actually the way we're designed. That means that like everything now is competing with everything else in the attention space. Netflix is competing with whether you go surfing, whether you go for a run, whether you like play a game, whether you're at work doing actual work instead of just mucking around on the internet. It's a global market for attention. And it's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. You can see, okay, people are spending hours on Facebook. Clearly, that's extremely valuable. Like that time, the value of those companies generally tracked the amount of time people were spending on them. If anything, the amount of time people were spending on them was way ahead of the market cap of those companies. And it was probably a really good way of identifying those companies earlier. And now with AI generation, the feedback loop is insane. So there's people worrying about like kind of AI slop, particularly for kids. Like if you ever seen young children on an iPad, the things they listen to are nuts. They're like it's like not English. It's like weird sounds, and it's kind of like bouncing around. At least in the past, that was based on what a team of people could experiment with, and you could try a few different things, create a few different videos, see what's working, optimize it. That limit is now gone. So you could create an hour long children's cartoon, right? You could optimize that. You could run endless iterations of different things. You can monitor when people are paying attention and then basically create extremely hyper addictive content for children or for adults. Obviously, that's happening to some degree in TikTok, but I think it's kind of easier to conceptualize it happening for kids because kids love cartoons, whereas adults, I guess you're already seeing, there's these AI Instagram models which seem to be very quickly attracting followers. Every time one of these fake AI kind of models goes up and people spend time on that comes directly out of time that they might have been swiping through, a real person. And I guess that's just starting now. Again, like to link it back to investments, that's going to take a lot of compute, and the return on investment in compute is going to be extremely high, perhaps higher than ever. There's probably a ton of opportunities around that. For an entrepreneur, you can just start this feedback loop.
I think that it will be really interesting to see how kids grow up and how AI and the videos and attention span will influence the way that they think. And I think on the flip side of that, creators in the entertainment industry, specifically in TV movies, Google just released VO 3, and people have been generating videos, scripts, visuals are amazing. I think so many industries are going to change.
That's a huge breakthrough that they've come up with. It was inevitable, but it's one of those ones like, oh, it's already here. God, there's so many business opportunities. It's a really exciting time.
I was just gonna say on the other side of like business opportunities, because if this is changing the way that kids learn, the way that people work, the way that we consume entertainment, there have to be some negative risks along with that in the sense of like fake news, kids cheating in school on tests and an assignment. What do you think the security side of this?
I think there'll be an arms race. I mean, there's probably a space for a product where you can immediately identify if something's AI or not, and then kind of like antiviral software, where sure you can probably stay one step ahead by making your content harder to identify as AI. The anti-AI or AI detection software will be one step behind. There's probably another really valuable business there if somebody could do that. The same way that like all those people made money out of antiviral software. In terms of tests, I think what's going to happen is we go back to pen and paper. That's probably one example where there might be a shift towards in-person things. It's starting to happen in the social space where there's been all this like online dating, obviously, but people are now trying to foster in-person events. There's a group that does like Wednesday night dinners, which is just taken off massively. There's 8 people have dinner who don't know each other. They'll organize it every Wednesday, which sounds like a kind of like, oh, that's kind of like a nice little niche thing. I think it's like taken off like wildfire and it's huge and it's like a massive business. There's clearly like that demand now for that. And so I think there's probably a lot of opportunities now in by going the opposite direction. Like as we go so hyper online and AI and all these frustrating things, and you know, your girlfriend or boyfriend is the person who the algorithm like showed you that day when you were single and you're swiping, you know, so your whole life trajectory depends on which particular 10 people they showed you that day. I think there'll be a movement away, or there'll certainly be space for people to do the opposite. But we'll see. I guess the real growth will be obviously online. One thing that's interesting is to think like how much search is going to ChatGPT. There's a number of different ways of calculating it. In this report, it said that ChatGPT hit 365 billion annual searches in 2 years, which took Google 11. So ChatGPT is certainly growing faster than Google did. Okay, so this is interesting. Using Google of all things. So Google is processing 8.5 billion searches a day. ChatGPT is processing 1 billion searches a day. So ChatGPT has taken like more than 10% market share of searches. That's a huge, huge outcome. And that's probably why Google's share price has been under a bit of pressure. I actually think that Google is a long-term or even short-term winner because they have the video, because they have the compute, because they have, you know, arguably some of the best models, because they have that billion users a month interacting with their AI. I think actually the market's probably got it wrong and they're a long-term winner. But the stock has been a pretty poor performer. It's down 11% this year, which for large companies is pretty bad. It's a really interesting data point, that 1 billion searches on ChatGPT a day versus 8.5 billion. And that's an estimate for May this year. And so you could see with time that actually increasing. I think I'm probably using ChatGPT more than Google at this stage, and I can't be the only person.
Does that mean when you ask it a question and then you ask it a follow-up question?
I think that's actually each question. But then it goes, okay, what does that...
Google.
Yeah, but then it means, okay, what does that mean for Google's revenue? Now, the way I think about that is like there's a global advertising pool. Google did 2 things. Firstly, they wiped out every other advertiser. Firstly, they hit like the newspapers, the billboards, TV. They took market share off those. And obviously, once companies shrink, all companies have some level of fixed costs. Once they shrink, things become really tough. And there were huge wipeouts in value. Some of the most valuable industries got effectively wiped out. But there was another factor to it. It wasn't just taking market share. It was the fact that it was so valuable to get a search. Your return on investment was so much higher, so you could justify spending more money. So the total market for advertising dramatically increased. And in a way, like almost every business, like not every business is a consumer business, but every consumer-related business has to spend money on Google and Facebook. If they don't, their competitors will, and they'll get the additional market share. So effectively, Google and Facebook and Meta, taxed like every consumer business. Every successful startup, the first thing they do is raise VC money, pump a huge chunk of that into Google and into Meta, and the ones that don't sell or can't make money out of it, the search markets, the cost of the search is too much, and they're not getting enough sales to recoup that, go out of business. But every successful business ends up spending more on those companies. Like if you have a good riff, a good marketing line, a good ad, you can just pour money into those companies. And so those companies, it didn't matter who won in each industry. They were the beneficiary of the winner. Anybody that came up with a good ad, a good product, or a good anything that like got a return on investment would just jam all that money into the ads, and all the money they made, they'd jam into ads and grow again. Now, where does that sit with ChatGPT now? So, and equivalents, though ChatGPT is by far the dominant player. We don't know. I don't think the spending will go. I mean, how could it happen? Could they take market share off Google? Possibly. Obviously, they're not doing it now. But if you're like, okay, I want to buy an SUV for family, ChatGPT, help me think through this, and it asks you a bunch of questions, and it goes through the options. Is there space for advertising there? Probably somewhere. It's probably not as valuable. Maybe that, but then we talk about that global market for attention. Maybe just taking attention, that means that those searches are less valuable. People are less likely to buy. Now, the bull case for Google is that actually the highest value searches are still going to be done on Google. It's like, I want to buy a car. Like you might start there, like SUV, or like, I don't know, apartment in Bondi. It might all just start with Google anyway. I want to buy a new toaster or something. Or Amazon. Remember Amazon took a decent chunk of search for those. Those are the valuable queries. So like, how big is the population of Australia? That's the kind of search that a lot of people do that is just information based, very little advertising value. It's the targeted stuff where you actually know you have a targeted buyer that's the most valuable. But it remains to be seen. Like, does the shift of attention away from Google into ChatGPT, does that potentially shrink the market? It's also, I mean, unlikely, but it's certainly possible. The value that Google gets for each search, there's like obviously an active tradable market in those queries. If there's less people clicking them, they're less valuable. If there's less attention on them, you can sell less toasters. So, but then again, everybody still needs a toaster, So it's not clear. I don't have a strong view yet which way it goes, but I think that's the way you look at it. Like taking market share, does it increase or decrease the total value of particular ad spend? I think that's a useful lens to look at, the future of that industry. Cases aren't advertising related at all. Like what's the advertising? Is ChatGPT going to show ads next to your coding question? Like I don't think so. It's probably the wrong way to monetize anyway. You're probably better off just charging a bit for high users. There's some really interesting stuff in this presentation as well. So the number of global developers in Google's ecosystem, which obviously you can measure, has gone up 5 times from May 2024 to May 2025. 5-fold increase in developers in that ecosystem, which is probably a good proxy for the increase in developers. So actually, the ease with which coding is done now through these large language model has massively increased the market of coders. Which again like translates into demand for all those big tech companies, and probably increases the entire rate of technological progress, which is also quite interesting. 5 times as many people coding and developing software. There was also this stat: 1,000 patents granted. There were 1,000 patents granted in 2022 versus 2004. So 1,000 more patents were granted in 2022 than there were in 2020. I'll say it again. 1,000 more patents were granted in 2022 versus 2004. So in 18 years, the number of patents a year increased by 1,000 to what looks like about 7 or 8,000 patents a year. In the last year, there's been an increase of 6,000. So if the number of patents is a proxy for technological progress, that's a huge increase. It's not a 6 times increase, it's a 6 times 18 increase. So almost well over 100-fold increase in the rate of patents. Now, maybe some of it's AI slop. I mean, we know some of it's AI slop, but there's no reason not to presume that a big chunk of it is actually real technological progress. There's another interesting stat here that says that years that took to reach 100 million users, 0.2. I remember when TikTok was the one that everybody was talking about, and that was probably 4 or 5 times longer to get to 100 million users. So it just gives another example of that growth. This is a pretty interesting chart on AWS that shows that CapEx, when they were building out their cloud platform, CapEx was 27% of revenue, which decreased to 4% in 2018. So clearly they like built all this, invested in all this infrastructure. It was harvest time. Like, let's make some money off this, of all this like stuff that we've built, all this infrastructure. That then started increasing and then rapidly increased, and now it's 49% of revenue. So they're spending an enormous amount. So the money that they're making is half, every dollar that they get in revenue, half of it is going straight into CapEx, with probably certainly the bulk of the profits of that going to one company, Nvidia. Okay, why don't we wrap up there, Eliana? Thanks so much for joining.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me again.